Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So we discuss dividend ETFs a lot on this channel. In fact, it's the #1 topic we discuss. But the question I want to try and answer in this video is, are non-dividend branded ETFs still good dividend ETFs? And as you can see in the title, today we're going to take a look at VTI through this lens. We're going to be comparing different measures against dividend ETFs to see whether or not this is in fact a good dividend investment. In fact, the most recent drawdown in the market does actually affect these calculations and could push this ETF over the edge and making it a good dividend play. Okay, so the first thing I want to do here is come over to one of my favorite tools, and this shows us the overlap between two different ETFs, and this can help us paint a mental map of where different ETFs sit relative to others. So the first comparison here is VTI against Schd, which is one of the best yet pretty concentrated dividend portfolios out in the market. We see Schd has 104 holdings, and basically all of them are within VTI. And the thing with VTI is that it is the total US stock market, and that's why it has 4,103 holdings. And as a byproduct of that, most dividend companies are within VTI, especially considering that dividend companies tend to be older and larger in market cap, giving it more presence in VTI. In fact, overall, there's a 10% overlap between the two. Now, the next comparison I want to do is nobl. This is an ETF of dividend aristocrats. And again, no shock, basically all of them are within VTI. And here the overlap is actually a little bit more, 14%. Next, we can do VIG to identify how much dividend growth is within VTI. And here the measure is pretty significant at 1/3. Following the same line of thought, we can do VYM to identify how much high yield is in VTI. And here a pretty similar 35%. And finally, SPYD, just to get another data point here. And we have overlap of 11%. Okay, so that's not bad. That proved that there's a meaningful amount of both high yield and dividend growth companies composing VTI. And on this page, we can see Schd on the right and VTI on the left. And this shows us basic things like assets under management and expense ratio. And here VTI is kind of unbeatable with an expense ratio of 0.03 and a ton of assets under management. Now, taking a look at just the price performance of these assets over the past couple of years, we have VTI in blue and Schd here in yellow. And what we can learn from this is that VTI is one of the top performing ETFs on the entire market. Although back in 2021, Schd wasn't too far behind, but VTI did have a clear lead, and now since the market is turning over, Schd is doing slightly better. So there is more volatility associated with VTI. It tends to both go up more and down more, at least compared to Schd. But let's remove that and do some more comparisons. Let's go with nobl, which again is dividend aristocrats. And again, the correlation is pretty similar here. As we discovered, about 1/3 of VTI is dividend companies, but the rest is small cap, growth, tech names, and that's why it tends to both go up and down more. In fact, VIG, which is a broad market dividend growth ETF, has the most similar price performance to VTI. So that was the price history of these various investments. But that, of course, doesn't take into consideration the dividend. So when it comes to VTI, it currently has a dividend yield of almost 1.5% with a 5-year growth rate of about 5.5%. And if we take a look at the historical dividend yield of VTI, as mentioned in the beginning of this video, because of the inverse nature of the yield and the price of an asset, right now the yield is beginning to spike, making this a more attractive dividend play. Now, it looks like the average yield is usually about 1.8%, so we still have some way to go, but it's a lot better than it was back in late 2021 of just over 1%. Taking a look at the data for Schd, they currently have a yield of 2.77% with a much faster dividend growth rate, although this is one of the biggest numbers in the category. So if we do some more comparisons, let's add nobl into this equation. So nobl has a yield of just 1.6%, and this is a collection of dividend aristocrats, although the growth rate is pretty impressive at 10%. And finally, if we do the same thing for VIG, which is a dividend growth ETF, they have a yield of 1.9% with a 9% growth rate. So what we can learn from this is that VTI does have relatively competitive dividend data, especially against some ETFs like VIG and nobl. And finally, if we put all this together and take a look at a total return chart, VTI is in blue and Schd is in green. And in this view, which by the way is probably the single most important, it brings the lines a lot closer together back in the bull market of 2021. And so far in this bear market, the higher dividend yield of Schd has really been helping it to maintain good returns. If you recall, VIG had a very similar dividend yield to VTI, and that's why through this view, not much really changes. And finally, comparing VTI versus nobl, I think it's safe to say VTI does have better performance, although right now they're almost tied. Yeah, so leave a comment down below, and do you guys think VTI is a good dividend ETF? Of course, it really helps you with diversification, over 4,000 holdings. As we saw from these comparisons, roughly a third of VTI is comprised of dividend-associated companies. The yield isn't the highest, but compared against VIG and nobl, it's pretty competitive. And as we saw here, even though the volatility of VTI is a bit more elevated compared to standard dividend ETFs, the overall performance is excellent. And currently with the market correction going on, the yield of VTI is steadily marching upwards, making it a more and more compelling choice for dividend investors. So let me know in the comments down below what you think of VTI through the lens of dividend investing. I'll be very interested to see what you guys have to say on the topic. But if you're still watching and enjoyed, I appreciate a like on the video, even subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next one.